ages ago, maybe 2005, something like that. And this band, the Blood Brothers, were on it.
Oh yeah, I know that. I remember them. They're awesome.
Yeah, right. I know, man. I liked their band. I feel like I tried to be friends with those guys, like time and time again. I was like, "Hey, man, great show," and Cold, like, yeah. And I was like, "Oh man, dude, like that one Phil, it reminds me of System of a Down." And he was like, "Oh, I can't stand the way that guy plays." And I was like, "Oh, I like him." And he goes, "Yeah, I can tell." And I was like, "Oh, Jesus Christ!" Like my stomach turned from like, that awful feeling of, "Oh my God, this person doesn't like me."
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Hello, everyone. You are tuned to another exciting episode of the MC Lars podcast. It is Monday, September 14th, 2020. We are back. And as many of you know, I took a hiatus in August, but I'm back regularly with the podcast, which this dope regular release schedule can attest to. Now, I know I'm not supposed to end sentences with prepositions, but that was just a proposition I had to make to y'all that we're going with it. This is part 2 of 3 of my Weerd Science interview. Weerd Science, Josh Eppad, is the drummer of Coheed Cambria, a wonderful band. And Josh and I crossed paths because, as you heard in the last podcast, we were mutual fans of each other. I loved his Weerd Science project, and Horus Records, my label, signed him, put out Sick Kids, which was the second record. And it was a great learning experience because I was a fan of his. I still am. He's still like one of my favorite rappers of all time. But we ended up doing Warped Tour together. We went to England. We stayed friends. And so I was like, let's do a part 2. But part 2 ended up being like 2 hours. So we're going to have part 2 this week, part 3 next week. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by the following Patreon Larsons. Shout out to the new ones who just signed up, Nathan, Adam, and Darren. And shout outs to the old ones, Christopher, Podtastic Man, and Alexis. And if you're looking for content to enjoy during quarantine, why not listen to my entire collection of songs about the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Yes, I did a song about every single movie in chronological order of the MCU. Next week, this coming week, I'm going to drop my Spider-Man Far From Home track, which is based on a loop from The Conscious Daughters, which is a Bay Area hip-hop group. Many of you from the Bay know their song Funky Expedition, and that became the sample for this beat because, as y'all know, in Far From Home, Spider-Man goes on a funky expedition of his own. But I've already said too much. I can't reveal that. Also, speaking of releases, our son Atlas is releasing a lot of Dukes, and Ash and I did a parody of Wet Ass Blank. We did Wet Ass Poopies that our boy Theosin mixed. That's going to drop this week, so keep your eyes peeled for that on Spotify and everything. Schaefer and I put out a single last Friday, which was like a play on the WFMU Tom Sharpling's Best Show, where they have a fake Juggalo call in and talk about the Gathering of the Juggalos from 2009. Anyway, it was very funny, and Schaefer and I listened to it a ton on our February tour, so we decided to do a quote-unquote cover of it. So life is good, lots of content, lots of flavor. Speaking of Atlas, from a few topics ago, we were talking about wet-ass poopies. Let's listen to this week's letter to Atlas. This is from my boy Mike Russo, who's my guitarist and bass player. He's been on the podcast. I interviewed him, then he interviewed me on the MC Lars episode. And anyway, he left this message to Atlas. Is he sleeping? Is he pooping? Just checking in. How's a little boy doing? These are some messages that you left. Wishing our little baby boy the best. Now it's time for Letters to Atlas.
Please leave a message after the tone.
Welcome to the world, little Atlas. You could not have asked to have been brought into it by any better parents than Andrew and Ashley. They're going to teach you how to live and love and grow and explore this journey to be the very best that you can be. I mean, look, already you're getting your first English lesson in alliteration. Who knows where you'll go from here? I love you guys. Atlas, I cannot wait to meet you. And I will hopefully see you all soon.
Thanks, Mike. Atlas can't wait to meet you too. If y'all want to call in and leave a message to our 4-month-old son, that will play him when he's older. The phone number is 510-463-4237. That's 510-463-4237. And it will go to a voicemail, my Google Voice, and I'll play it on the podcast. So yeah, that's a lot of background. What else? Oh, I've been reading a great book. It's called, The Chronicles of Prydain, which some of you may know. Lloyd Alexander wrote this series. I got into it because the Black Cauldron the Disney movie is on Disney Plus, and it's a famous one of their unfortunate missteps. People cite it as a movie that didn't make its budget back. It was kind of got away from the original source material, but it was one of the first Disney movies to have CGI. It was one of the first PG rated cartoons, and it's pretty dope, pretty spooky. But the Book of Three is the first in Lloyd Alexander's series, and I'm reading it, and it's dope. So I just wanted to shout out Lloyd Alexander, rest in peace, amazing science fiction fantasy author, more fantasy than science fiction, but yeah, I've been enjoying that. So at night, I try to get off social media, try to put my phone away. It's actually really good for my well-being, and I hope some of you are, as we're in quarantine, aren't giving in to the whole matrix of hatred and rage and consumption and data monitoring and all this dystopian flavor as we transition into the next decade. Read some Lloyd Alexander. He's tight. Okay, so this is my interview. That was a tangent, but I like to talk about what I've been up to during the week. This is my interview with Weerd Science, part 2 of 3. So I am back. This is part 2 with my man Josh Eppad, aka Weerd Science, and there was more to talk about, so we scheduled a second time to talk, and y'all recorded a video recently, but you were going to tell me a story, and I wanted to make sure we got all this. So hello, Josh. Welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, so good to be back. And we were kind of, before we hit record, I actually told Lars, I said, dude, you should record this. This is good. We were talking about how Coheed is kind of perceived as like this ultra serious, dare I say, pretentious, really artsy band. But we have, like any of the fans know, we have a long history of doing like really silly shit. Even going back to our first like big video, A Favor House Atlantic, is like incredibly silly, because that's what happens when you've got 4 guys that live in a van together. You start throwing around ideas. Hey, you know what would be funny? Hey, you know what would be funny? I mean, Lars, you get this where like art and lightheartedness like intersect. There can be like this really beautiful space. I mean, Signing Emo was like, it was funny, but it also had like, it was such a great commentary about the music scene. But it ultimately, man, it was really funny. I think Coheed has had like those moments. I could point to the Favor House Atlantic video. In 2015, we did a video for You Got Spirit Kid. This song, it was the single off a record called The Color Before the Sun. And the video is, well, we thought it was funny. I'm naked in the video and getting picked on in high school. The joke is that we're obviously way too old to be in high school, which we thought was funny. But yeah, there's a serious like part of the band, and we take it very serious, but there's always been like in the lineage, in the tapestry of Coheed, the Coheed quilt, if you will, some of those squares are definitely comedy influenced and have like an air of lightheartedness. But we are definitely like looked at as this ultra. There's a story, dude, and I can't even believe I'm bringing this up. But so we did this tour ages ago, maybe 2005, something like that. And this band, the Blood Brothers, were on it.
Oh yeah, I know that. I remember them. They're awesome.
Yeah, right. I know, man. I liked their band. I feel like I tried to be friends with those guys like time and time again. And admittedly, I'll acknowledge that a lot of this could have been my own hang-ups and my own feelings of like being ostracized or like not fitting in or whatever. But I always felt like I got like the cold shoulder from those guys. And then one day I was walking by and they were doing we had this guillotine that was behind us, this fake guillotine that would drop at the end of the show. And no one thought the guillotine was cornier than me. Like, I thought it was really cheesy, which I kind of liked. I don't know. I was like, oh, dude, it's fun. We're almost like toying with this Iron Maiden world of being like theatrical or whatever.
Right.
And a couple of the guys in Blood Brothers were like, hey, use the guillotine to cut my bagel. No big deal. But to me, like, you got these guys that like kind of like are always, I felt like making fun of us and being like, I don't know, kind of like cold to me, like always. And then I brought it up to somebody. Now, this isn't good and it's embarrassing to admit, but like, I was on a lot of drugs. This is 2005 and pretty much the height of my addiction, and the height of my addiction spread out over years. But 2005, it was as bad as it gets. I mean, I'm literally shooting heroin in the bathroom all day long, every day, and I'm a mess. I'm a junkie, and my life is completely going off the rails. So I don't know if like my perception of this is even reality based. Like I'll admit that happily. I brought it up to the tour manager. Like it hurt my feelings. I was like sick of these dudes like making fun of us. They're too cool for us. They always act like they're like the cool kids in school. And like there was a meeting about like why we couldn't get along. But then only like last year, somebody from Blood Brothers tweeted about that incident, and they said, in 2005, we did a tour with that band, Coheed Cambria, and we had to have a full-on meeting about us making fun of their guillotine. Taking yourselves so seriously is bullshit. And then some dudes from the Mars Volta were like, I can't stand that shit. And it's like, whoa. Nobody takes us like seriously, like in the band. Like none of us take this like ultra serious to it. It was never about the guillotine. I even wrote him back. I said, dude, I was on a lot of drugs. And to be honest, I just probably thought it was a good excuse to like try to be friends. Honestly, like that's really, or maybe I tweeted, I thought it was a good excuse to not talk to you guys, which is definitely different than what I just said. But
wait, so did they actually use the cut their bagel with it, or they were just like being smart asses?
No, it was a fucking plastic. You couldn't cut anything with it. It wasn't a real guillotine, obviously. And their merch guy was being funny. You know what, dude? They were making fun of the guillotine, and I would have joined in the making fun of it. Like, it was so cheesy to me. I never was like, hey, you guys can't make fun of our guillotine. It was like after weeks of trying to get along with, I remember talking to the drummer once, and I was like, hey, man, great show. And, Cold, like, yeah. And I was like, oh, man, dude, like that one fill, it reminds me of System of a Down. And he was like, oh, I can't stand the way that guy plays. And I was like, oh, I like him. And he goes, yeah, I can tell. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like my stomach turned from like, that awful feeling of, oh my God, this person doesn't like me. That happened, dude. That interaction happened.
And they were opening for y'all, or was it a co-headlining?
No, they were opening for us. I think they were the first band on a 3-band bill. It was like them and Dredge.
Oh my God. You want to be nicer than that. I mean, I don't know them, but that seems like,
well, I know, man, and I like their band too. It makes it hurt even worse. I always thought like that they put on a show that like I believed, and I loved that drummer. I think Mark was his name. Like I loved that drummer, but yeah, he wasn't like maybe as adults now we look back, like maybe he remembers it like completely differently, and I'd be 100% like willing to hear his side of things. But I get it, man. They thought our band was corny. Do you think that's the first time another band thinks Coheed Cambria is corny? That's fine. That's not there's not a prerequisite to me being friends with you that you have to like the band I'm in. Absolutely not. But the guys in Coheed can always laugh at themselves, and it's funny to see a tweet from some guys that toured with us, like saying it's the exact opposite. And I do feel like we have this energy of like that. We're like that. Like we take it so serious and like up its own ass pretentious, but then we'll do funny, silly shit all the time. But that just never lands on that radar. We always get. I think it's just an easy narrative to absorb that like, oh yeah, we're pretentious prog guys, when really we're like silly pop guys. Like that's kind of the world we kind of dance between both worlds. But that Blood Brothers story is funny, man. It upset me at the time because I'm such a fan of At the Drive-In and Mars Volta, and like one of the guys chimed in about how he hates when bands take themselves so seriously, and I wish that like there was a way that I could have said like, hey, we don't, that guillotine thing was not really about the guillotine. It was about like, I wanted to be friends, and it was like, they were never nice to us. That's the honest to God truth. It sounds kind of pathetic, but just kind of a funny story. It's about the last thing I thought we'd get into in the podcast, but it's just kind of a funny story.
Is that the guillotine is the one that's on the cover of the album with like the angel wings? Was it like an...
Yeah. So that's why we brought it out on tour. And like, a lot of that stuff I was uncomfortable with. That was like a huge source of tension in Coheed back then. This was like my first tenure. I hadn't left the band yet. I'd done a bunch of shit that they should have booted me out. I mean, I really put those guys through. Those guys, Blaze, the management, the label, I put them through a lot, and they put up with a lot, dude. I mean, shit, they had no bit. I didn't have any right to even be there anymore, dude, with the shit that I put them through. And I think it's a credit to our friendship and a credit to those guys' patience and And, they wanted me in the band. They didn't want me to leave the band. And so, I ended up taking advantage of that and putting them through a lot. But I wasn't really comfortable with the theatrical stuff. And instead of like voicing that and landing on a spot through communication, I just kind of kept it all in and was like deeply uncomfortable with it. I thought it was corny. I thought it was super duper corny. So then you can imagine my surprise when there's this story about I take that guillotine so serious. I had a meeting about it because you made fun of it. It was like, no one could think that thing's whacker than me. Like, I think that was the wackest thing I ever saw. But, in hindsight, man, like Claude had a vision that if I had just expressed that to him, I bet he would have explained it to me in a way that I would have understood it. Because Claude has a long history of explaining things to me and like opening up my view. And I didn't really see it in the way he did. I didn't have like a broad enough. I wasn't thinking Iron Maiden. I wasn't thinking about those Alice Cooper in that world. In my mind, I wanted to be fucking Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin. Although here's Pink Floyd, who literally had puppets build an entire wall in front of them when they played the Wall Tour. So, that kind of theatrical element can exist. But at the time, I was like deeply uncomfortable with it, where now I'm like, let's bring that guillotine back. I want more stuff like that because I think corny with a wink is cool in my eyes, which I think Coheed embodies a lot of that.
Well, that's a good transition because this episode, I wanted to discuss, on the last episode, we talked about your older records. We talked about Sick Kids. We talked about Warped Tour. I wanted to talk about the 3 album arc of the Red Light Juliet and how it's interesting how, some of your earlier stuff is funnier. You definitely have funny songs, but those 3 albums kind of take a more serious twist. And I want to also focus on the song Red Light Juliet and the alien encounter and where that all came from and like what it was like making those records. Because at that point in both of our careers, we did Sick Kids, and then you and I kind of both were doing our own thing for a minute. So I never really got to talk to you about it. But what's the background on that trilogy of records?
Well, I'm so happy to talk about those records. A lot of times, like, Friends and Nervous Breakdowns and Sick Kids get like brought up as the main records when really the most successful records we had, well, maybe not more than Friends and Nervous Breakdowns, but like they did really well for us, those 3 records, because we did it all ourselves. We learned so much from doing Sick Kids with you. We just learned a lot. We learned a lot about like, hey, we can't do this on our own because this shit is a lot of work. There's so much bullshit that comes up. And we had like a really, we kept it small and kept it mom and pop. We didn't have these like kind of grand dreams about like what it could achieve. And then it ended up surpassing like everything that we thought it could. So it was like a really great experience. But artistically, I think I just grew up, Andrew. I think I was like, man, do I really want to make more songs about, like punching pregnant girls or like, doing like, those are the musings of like a young man. The world around me had changed. My views kind of had changed. I was growing up. And when I sat down to write, that's kind of what came out. I ended up talking about, ghosts and aliens and shit. And that was what was interesting to me. And kind of, I don't know, man, with a sober mind, like dredging through a lot of these things that happened to me as a kid. And there's like this really kind of weird story with my family in regards to sleep paralysis. And for those of you that don't know what sleep paralysis, and a lot of people do, like, but when I grew up pre-internet or the internet in its like, most early infant stages, I thought I was the only one that had sleep paralysis. I thought I was haunted by a demon. And, it scared the shit out of me. I mean, every night, terrified to go into my room. And I'm not a little kid, man. We're talking 15, 16 years old. I'm in a band we're signing to Universal Records, and I'm out drinking with my buddies at 16, and I would come home and sleep on my mom's floor because I was too afraid to sleep in my room. Because at night when I would get trapped in this sleep paralysis, which is just the rational explanation is a piece of your brain is asleep, a piece of your brain is awake. So you can see, but you can't move. Your brain kind of it mutes your body's movement so you don't act out every movement in a dream. And you're stuck and you can't move. There's a really neat movie about it, I think called The Nightmare. It's a documentary about sleep paralysis. And a lot of us have the same story. It's a wild experience. But as a kid, I mean, it really scared the shit out of me. So I think I'm the only person in the world that's having this. And the answer is a demon is haunting me. Like I'm the product of Satan or hell. And a demon has found its way into my existence, into my universe. And it would whisper my name, but its face was an inch from mine. And it would just look at me. And I can't move. And I would cry. And I'd scream. And no, you can't scream. All that you can do is go, and it was horrifying. So eventually, I'm telling my parents that this happens to me. And my mom always gets weird about it. Like there's just, she has a weird energy she's giving off. And she keeps just telling me to pray to Jesus. Now was not raised in a religious family.
Mm.
I've been to church twice in my life, dude. Like we were not raised religious, but my mom, clearly on some level believed in Jesus. And then she finally told me that it happens to her too.
Mm.
But she didn't want to tell me that. And to this day, I don't know why she didn't. I mean, I would think that would help me. Like, hey, you're not alone in this. Because this was like, a long time of going through this. And then she finally told me that it happens to her. And then my brother finally told me that it happens to him too. But he said, Mom made me promise to never tell you.
Wow, weird.
Again, I wish that why wouldn't you tell me that? Like that. But my mom thinking that it would scare me more that it happened. So that was that's where she was coming from. But anyway, so I'm writing this record and these are the things that's coming up. And then, my grandmother's like, just, she's not into anything like any kind of like new age or hippie culture. She's old school, man. She lived through the Depression. You get a job, you work hard, you buy a house, you have a family. And if you don't, you're fucking up. Everyone has to suffer like she did. Love my grandmother, but that's her world. Not the kind of lady that would say something like this. She goes, oh yeah, when I was a teenager, I used to get pulled out of my bed all the time. Wait, and it was like, what? Holy shit. Wait, what? Oh yeah. Something would grab me by the foot and yank me out of my bed. I'd land on the floor and we're like, Jesus, is my family haunted? Like, she's just not the kind of, and if you know my brother too, he's not the kind of person that would make these things up. Now, again, no knowledge of sleep paralysis or what it is until eventually my brother does a paper on it. My brother's still in college. We're young, and he researches and finds all this stuff about it. And it was deeply interesting. And, there's a lot of schools of thought that it's like the first step towards, astral projection. And I've definitely had times where I float around the room. I mean, a rational, logical Josh is willing to, at the very least, acknowledge that, perhaps it's all just like a brain trick. It's a brain malfunction and it creates you feel like you're floating around the room. The other side of it, and I'm not writing that off. That could be, but like, man, it sure feels like something major. It feels like something beyond the limits of like my own understanding or a human's own understanding. It's powerful, man. It's
still
fucking
happen?
powerful. Oh, all the time.
Wow.
All the time. It's different now. It's different than when I was a kid. When I was a child and I'd be locked in, I couldn't move anything, nothing. Maybe around like my late 20s, I started noticing that I can move my toes pretty good and my fingers, but still be locked. I can't move my arms. There's a weight on my chest, which is why I think a lot of people and in the lore and a lot of pictures from yesteryear, there's a picture of this little demon that sits on your chest. And I think that's just a natural byproduct of the weight. There's a weight on your chest when you sleep. I guess that's what it feels like to sleep. We're, in a way, we're lucky. We get this kind of like interesting and unique experience where we get to feel what it's like to sleep, whereas most people don't know because, well, they're asleep. But it's morphed and it's changed. I used to pull out of it. I was like the Dream Master from Nightmare on Elm Street 4. I was like, somehow I learned that if I relaxed every muscle and your adrenaline, Lars, is flowing. So imagine your heart pounding, adrenaline just flowing, but you can't move. And it's just the oddest. And a lot of times, dude, it's funny. Like when adrenaline starts flowing, it's like fight or flight. And I start talking shit to the demon, but like It's ridiculous. It's like, you have no idea what I'm capable of, you motherfucker. You came in the wrong kid's bedroom tonight. I'm going to destroy you. That's me talking to the demon.
If anyone's in the room, would they hear you talking?
No, it's like an internal monologue. You can't talk.
Oh, wow.
You can't use your vocal cords. All that comes out is this, like, but inside that's, help me, please. And you can imagine this happening to a child, though, dude. Like, and no one really there to kind of guide me through it. It changed my life. I mean, it has a lot to do with like a lot of things today, I think. It's so grand. It's so powerful that first time you don't forget. I was in my room going to sleep, and then, I had fallen asleep, and somehow, I was trapped in it. Now, to some people, this happens when they wake up. It's never happened to me like in the morning when I wake up. It's always as I fall asleep. Nowadays, as it's morphed, I can feel it coming on minutes before it happens, and I can get up and kind of go around. You have to fully get up and reapproach sleep. You can't just like, oh, I'm awake, let me go back to bed. No, it will happen. You have to get up, have a bowl of cereal, watch some TV, reapproach sleep, and oftentimes it'll still happen. But the first time it happened to me, going to sleep, boom, I'm stuck. An instant rage of adrenaline and fear. I can't move. Oh my God, am I paralyzed? What happened? And then I hear my name being whispered from my closet area. And it's not a voice I've ever heard. This voice doesn't come from my imagination. It felt like, it was a voice unlike, I couldn't mimic it. It wasn't low, like, but it was, I don't know, man. It didn't feel human to me. And I felt it get closer as it whispered my name till it was an inch from my face. And just looking at me, and I can feel tears coming out of my eyes, but I can't shake, I can't move, and I mean stuck in a way that I don't get stuck now. Like I could move my feet.
How old were you?
God, I was old enough to like, maybe 14, 15 in that world, because I wasn't a young kid. I wasn't like 8, but maybe 13. It was maybe middle school era, but like you're becoming, you're growing up. You're not I wasn't 5. And then as this thing whispered in my ear, I heard my name. This is fucked up. 100 people whispering my name, 100 things whispering my name from off in the distance, while this thing whispered my name, and I could feel its breath on my ear. I could feel the heat from its mouth on my ear, just whispering my name over and over again. And after that, I didn't sleep in my room for a long time.
So you sleep in your parents' room?
I'd sleep in my parents' room at 8. Dude, I'm like 14, 13, whatever. Like I'm growing up. This went on for years. So when I talk about being 16, I would still, not all the time, but I'd have an episode and I'd sleep in my mom's room. But yeah, the first one was the whispers. And I talk about that on the Red Light Juliet records. I talk about the whispers. Then it was years of kind of collecting information about my family. They didn't offer it up right away. So, and months go by and it doesn't happen again. And then it's like, oh, maybe it was just a dream. That's what I remember. Even I had convinced myself, like, maybe that was a dream, but it wasn't a dream. Or perhaps it was a dream and reality, like, clashing.
Okay, so 2 things I want to talk about. You had described to me before, I remember on Warped Tour, you told me how, like, withdrawing from heroin felt a lot like there was a demon on your chest, like while you were sweating and trying to deal with the pain of heroin withdrawal. And I'm just wondering, man, like if this is an insensitive question, please tell me, but
oh, you're fine. You're good.
When you were high, in a way, was that ever like, would you still have sleep paralysis, or would you sleep enough that it wouldn't wake you up? Like, was that an impetus for your use ever?
No, dude, drugs in general would bring on sleep paralysis a lot of times, but not just heroin. Yeah. Over-the-counter sleep aids. One of the worst sleep paralysis that I ever had was from taking Tylenol PM, which is kind of why I don't take it. Like I just, it's like, it's something about that. And I also, this has nothing to do with sleep paralysis. I used to have a condition. You ever heard of people with restless leg syndrome?
Yeah.
So a lot of people think that's like when their legs just need to move. For me, it was, my legs need to move because it's painful if they don't. It hasn't happened in years, knock on wood, but Tylenol PM, drugs would bring that on as well, to where I'm laying down and all I want to do is go to sleep, but it's almost as if my bones are stretching in my leg and I have to move my legs, because if I don't, this sensation takes over and it goes from the bottom of my ankles all the way up to like the fat of my inner thighs. And that's what I think restless leg syndrome is. Because I was talking to my man Upgrade about it, and he's like, yeah, dude, I have restless leg syndrome. And I was like, dude, you have that too? But then what he described to me is just like nervous energy making his legs kind of move. That's not what I experienced. But yeah, that's been years that hasn't happened. But like drugs would it would be like a pathway into that. And in terms of sleep paralysis, yeah, drugs did not help it. There were a lot of times that it would bring it on.
Wow.
And you think that right there would be enough? Dude, by the time I was doing drugs, though, I'd had it 1,000 times. You know, it wasn't nearly as frightening. It's frightening. Like, my wife knows. Like, it's understood in our relationship. If she feels my finger rubbing on her to shake me awake. Wow. It's just a known thing. It happens. And it oftentimes, if it happens once in a night, it's going to happen 5 times.
Oh, boy.
Until you get up. And sometimes it's hard, dude. It's like all you want to do is go back to sleep. So you got that 10-second window. You say, I'll go back to sleep. Stuck again. God damn it. There has been other times in my adult life that I'll have my iPad on my chest and like some show is 30 Rock is on, and I'll just focus on that. And I don't listen or I don't pay attention to anything going on around me. And I just go to sleep. And I wake up in the morning. Like, for years, I wondered what would happen if I saw it through. Where would I end up cosmically if I go into the void? Well, the answer is you end up waking up in the morning and everything's fine. So that leads me to believe it's just a brain malfunction. I mean, that is what they say it is. It's like a portion of your brain is awake because you can see, but you can't really like blink. You can't open your eyes like all the way like normal. Even your eyes are muted and all your movement is muted. But in my adult life, I can move a little bit, which is kind of frightening, man. I don't know if it's a precursor to like my brain really malfunctioning, which has its own deep and terrifying roots. As my mom just died from Alzheimer's. Her brain betrayed her, and it's like, God, is that happened to her? It happened to my brother. But meanwhile, my mom's mom is 88 and she's pretty damn sharp for 88, and she's lived a long life. So I'm always terrified that it's like a precursor to my brain, that I'm going to have some kind of, I mean, Lord knows I don't want Alzheimer's. No, but I don't want anyone to ever get it. It's so awful. But I do have those fears. And as I've gotten older, it's strange. I can kind of move a little bit inside of sleep paralysis. I can't stand up. I can't just like pick up my arm and move it normal, but I can move my fingers. Like maybe in the beginning, 20 years ago, was just my fingertips. But now I can like move my hand. Now I can move my feet. And oftentimes as it's landing, oh no, here it comes, sleep paralysis, I'll start waving my leg and kicking my leg. And then I'm in sleep paralysis, yet I can still kick my leg. Just my leg though, just one leg. Say it's my right leg. And then I'm kicking my wife. Like I'm screaming inside, please wake me up. Please wake me up. But all that's coming out is,
yeah.
And sometimes she'll sleep through me, literally like, pulverizing her with my knee, because it's not like I can't move it 100% free, but it's like this muted movement. But I'm just like hitting her with my knee as hard as I can, trying to wake her up. And she just goes, and turns over and goes back to sleep. And I'm like, help me, motherfucker.
Because she's asleep. She doesn't know.
She is a heavy sleeper, dude. She is the heaviest sleeper. So oftentimes, like if I'm touching her, my finger, I'll have to do it for like 3 minutes before she finally wakes up and shakes me. But
yeah.
Yeah, it happens a lot, man. It's not, but man, dude, it happens to a lot of people. That was my saving grace. And I'll never forget the first time I met someone other than my mother and brother that had it. And I was at like a party. I'll never forget. It was at a kid named James Esposito's house. And a girl goes, sleep paralysis? That happens to me. And I kind of was like, well, bullshit. What happens? And then she explained it to the T. And I was like, oh my God, that happens to you too? And then I realized it happens to a lot of people. I'm sure there are people listening to this that it happens to. I mean, they made a damn movie about it. The Nightmare is a really interesting look at what happens during these experiences that are eerily common. They all have like the shadows. That's another thing that's happened maybe 4 or 5 times in my life. I've had a shadow stand over me.
Wow.
And this is weird, man. And it pets my head, kind of like it pours light into my mouth, and it tastes like, I don't know. I would like pennies. If you were to suck on pennies or nickels or something, like metal, it tastes like metally. And, it terrified me the first time it happened. I started telling people about that. And then a buddy of mine, or Mike Birnbaum from Applehead Studios, was like, you have dreams where a shadow pours light into your mouth? And I was like, yeah, dude, it sucks. He's like, no, that's deep. That's awesome, he said. And I was like, wait, is it? And now I'm like, hey, when's that shadow coming back, man? It's been a few years. I need a light refill. But yeah, that's happened a handful of times. It might be either 4 or 5 times. And it's a reoccurring thing. And I'm not crazy, but I have to acknowledge like the very logical, hey, your brain can make up anything. I mean, if the limits are your imagination, well, then there's no limits really, but man, it doesn't feel like a dream when it happens. And going back to the Red Light Juliet thing, I think writing those records, and those records there's songs still about my ex-girlfriend. There's songs about, whatever, all kinds of stuff, clearly still stuff about drug stuff. A lot of like people were like, man, you got to write something other than drug shit. But it was like, that was my life. And that's what I was going through. And in a way, like getting clean, it was like, well, I can't just write about drugs anymore. And that's kind of just what came out. You ever sit down with nothing, no preconceived notion, and just like the stream of consciousness, like it kind of flows in and it goes through your mind and through your heart and comes out that pen onto the paper. And that's what it was about. There was definitely a lot of that. I did not sit down to write Red Light Juliet and say, I'm going to write about my experiences with either sleep paralysis or this or that or the other thing. It just kind of happened. After the first one, that's when it was like, oh, this is a path I'd like to explore. And then on Red Light Juliet 2, there's a song called A Whole Haunting where I talk about my mom's experience with sleep paralysis, my brother's experience, my grandmother's experience, and how it all kind of pertains to mine. And I talk specifically about the light being poured into my throat because I think it had happened recently when I wrote Red Light Juliet 2, and it was really like fresh to me. I think that was the last time. If it happened one more time, it was still years ago. It's been a long time since that happened. And I've had many, many sleep paralysis episodes. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands since then. But no shadow with the light. That has not happened ever since I moved into my new house. It hasn't happened.
What's cool about the first Red Light Juliet, the song, is for those you haven't heard it, and I think we should end this this episode playing it, is that you liken it to an alien abduction. And it's really, really interesting hearing you talk about it, how that like poetically became that story. And it reminds me of the famous book Communion, which takes place like upstate New York, kind of near you.
Fucking Accord, New York, dude. Yeah. Like, I'm not convinced it isn't alien induced.
Wow.
Why not, dude? Why? I mean, dude, I'm not convinced of anything.
Yeah.
Because, if we can contact, extraterrestrial beings in like the way we think about them, right? Oh, a spaceship comes down and they come out, and it's way deeper than that. And you can contact them in this other universe known as your mind and the power of our minds. And like, who knows, man, maybe that is part of abduction. And then I think a lot of people that were abducted by aliens had sleep paralysis, and that's kind of what their minds conjured. That could totally be. And then they're delivered back to their beds like nothing happened. And I think I spent a lot of time as a kid hoping that that's what it was, because that was much more palatable than a demon that had its sights on me. I mean, it was frightening, dude. It was so frightening as a kid. And my friends, you're a 16-year-old boy. You're not bringing that up to your homeboys. You're not like, hey, guys, like, you guys ever so scared you sleep on your mom's floor? Like, it's like, I wasn't comfortable enough with my group of friends to really like bring that up to them, which I don't even know why now. I should have. We're talking about like Kwame, like good people, I probably actually did tell Kwame, but like, I don't know. That's not the same. 16-year-old kid isn't the same as like 40-year-old man now. It's like, I'm comfortable talking about it and it's interesting to me, but man, it was so frightening. I think that I was probably hoping it was aliens. God, I sure hope it's aliens. That'd be a lot better than demons. What a strange sentence to say, but those were like the inner thought. That's a lot of what was going on as a kid. Now in the song, from back when I was just a young kid, I remember digging a piece of metal out of my skin. There's always some artistic license that you take with songs, right? But that is also true. I remember having like this blue birthmarky type thing on my arm, and like I picked it off in school one day, and it was like, it probably was a rock, honestly, from playing baseball or something that got lodged under my skin. But it did like freak me out. And I remember I didn't show it to my mom. That's the artistic license. But I remember telling my mom about it. And then I had my own ideas of like, God, could it have been? And then it's like I'm writing this story, and there's, it's like that the real story is not quite as interesting. So like I take it in these places of like, oh, what if I showed my mom? And I almost picture it like a movie scene where I'm showing my mom this like piece of weird metal that I pulled out of my skin, and it like frightens her. But I'm using a lot of like my real experience, like telling when my mom broke the news to me that she had sleep paralysis, it was not like a nice, friendly chat. I mean, and as vague as these memories are, like I remember I was crying, and I was saying like, something is in my room. You don't understand. Something's in my room. And she said, I know, because it happens to me. God damn it. That's why. Is that what you want to hear? I know, because it happens to me.
Wow.
And it was like this moment. Yeah, it's like straight out of a movie at this moment. And yeah, I'll never get the answer. It's like, as to, I wish she was here, man, because I'd ask her. And I think I know the answer. I think she thought that would scare me more, when it's like, oh my God, if I just knew I wasn't alone, that would have like helped me so much. But then maybe she thought that I'd be too afraid to sleep even in the house. Maybe in her mind, and I'm just thinking this right now, I never really thought about that before. Maybe in her mind it was, well, he thinks this is confined to his room. If I tell him it happens to me, then he won't sleep on my floor. Then he won't sleep in this house. So maybe that was her thinking. But I mean, in hindsight, God, I would have really liked to have known that I wasn't alone. And then my brother telling me his story was so human that it was like weird. Mine was so not human. Even the breath and a voice, it just felt not human to me. But that could be my own fears. Whereas my brother's story, the first time it happened to him, something sat on his chest, which it seems like everyone has that story. And it said, if you scream, I'll cut your throat, which is such a human thing to say. I say that in A Whole Haunting, in the song A Whole Haunting, which out of all of like the Weerd Science stuff, like that's a song that I go back to a lot and am genuinely proud of. I mean, the whole Red Light Juliet series, I'm really proud of that stuff. I think like I'll stand by that. There are some songs that I've done that when I hear them, it's pretty cringy for me, but I just try to remember, hey, that was a young man talking about young man things that I thought were funny back then. But the Red Light Juliet stuff I'm deeply proud of it. Sick Kids too, as dark as it is. And like, there's definitely some fucked up stuff. I felt like beholden to maybe this idea that you had to have a couple really funny songs, but like, I am proud of those records, but I don't know. Red Light Juliet was something, and it's specifically A Whole Haunting, the song off Red Light Juliet too, where I say about Joey, I'll cut your throat if you try to scream. That sounds so human. That was my takeaway from that. Even back then, God, that's so, like, that sounds like a criminal, like like the soul of a criminal would say that. Like, it just was so human. It was different than my experience. And then my brothers had sleep paralysis many, many times after. In fact, real quick, we were on tour once, Coheed and 3, my brother's band 3. And I had a bout of sleep paralysis on the bus. The reason I remember this is because it's only happened once or twice. And this is the only time that I actually bona fide remember it, because the fear had taken a back seat because I'm around all my friends. All my friends. It's like that kid still in me that had to sleep on my mom's floor. Like, I need someone around me because I'm so scared of the unknown of sleep. Well, here you are. You're on a bus. You're in a moving submarine with 11 of your friends sleeping around you. So I felt more at ease, and I floated. And I floated out of my bunk, and I remember, as silly as this is, trying to wake Claudio up. And I'm trying to, like, whisper to him or wake him up, and I'm so close to him. So I wake up, or I get up, and I go back to sleep, and I show up to the venue, and my brother is there, and he's like, dude, I had the craziest sleep paralysis last night. I was like, holy shit, dude, so did I. And he tells me the story of in the hotel room. Now, my brother is blind as a bat. Dude, without his glasses, he can't see shit. He wears contacts all the time. He's super duper blind. and he was having sleep paralysis, and he was reading the back to try to calm himself down. He's reading the back of like the sticker on the hotel door. You are here in case of fire. You know, we've all seen a million of them, like the highest cost we can charge you is this. And he's reading it, just trying to calm himself down. But he's also going, and so, you know, they're sharing a hotel room. So somebody hears him and shakes him awake. And then he looks at that sign and he's like, there's no way on God's green earth that I could read that sign without being close to it.
So, wow.
And he's like, I was right there. I was right next to it. And we both had these out of body experiences on the same night, yet miles apart. They might have, I don't know exactly where but we weren't in the same vicinity. You know, I'm on a bus headed somewhere. He's at a hotel. We weren't around each other. We both, isn't that odd?
Yeah,
it's just odd. And it could be a coinky dink, but just one of those cool, odd things, I guess.
I remember, and I wonder if this ties in, and maybe it's the last question I have for you, like outside the music. You told me once you were in New Orleans and you met like a fortune teller who told you through your life you're going to have like difficult struggles. And tell me more about that story. And like, because I remember you telling me that really tripped you up, especially like back in 2011 when you told me that story. And did it tie in with this at all? Am I remembering right?
Not that I can think of like off the top of my head, dude. Like I used to really like to go to fortune tellers.
Yeah.
There was one, I think it was in like not Cape Cod, but like New England-y, that she looked at all the Coheed guys and she looked at Claudio's hands and she goes, you're going to have 3 big decisions in your life. And I made the joke. I looked at her. I went, yeah, 1, 2, 3. And I pointed to me, Travis, and Mike, because this was like at a time when like everybody was saying that we were just a hired band and Claudio was actually the only guy signed and that we were all just hired guns, which I always took as a compliment. I was like, you think we're good enough that we're hired guns? Oh, that's pretty cool, I guess. So it was like a thing I would do. I do remember the one in New Orleans, but yeah, I don't know, man. Like, you know, listen, I'm like open-minded and sometimes I have to work to be, but as I get older, I can feel myself like closing off to things. And I do think a lot of that, like fortune teller stuff is like bullshit. You know, I think that's why I was always interested in it. 'Cause I wanted to see like how much bullshit they would spew. But at the same time, I'm like a believer. I'm this weird like juxtaposition, right? I'm not landed on one spot. Like I do believe, and I believe in things that are beyond our understanding, or perhaps I just want to, because mystery is beautiful. You know, it's like as adults, we all have answers for all these things. And like, sometimes you just walk outside and you stare up and you go, holy shit, we don't know nothing. Like, that's a great feeling to me. Like the unknown can be frightening, surely, but like, I like feeling like there's more. But then on the flip side, it's like, oh God, a lot of these things are total bullshit. My father's dating a psychic, a professional psychic right now. So talk about fortune telling.
Wow.
Every time I'm around my dad, I get my fortune told. But no, Lars, I'm not making really any connection to, I remember going to a fortune teller. You tell me what I told, because I remember going to one in New Orleans. I think more than once. I think a few times I went, because they happened to just be around. There'd be like a little shop and it would say like, you know, fortune teller, get your readings. And I think I can remember 2 times going, but I've gone to them all over the country, you know, like, I haven't done it as much like lately or even in like the last 10 years, but there was a time I was like way into it and I would go in and sometimes they'd say shit that would like, you'd kind of knock your socks off, you know?
I remember you telling me you're like, some fortune teller said something like, you're going to have struggles throughout your life. And you said you internalized that as feeling like, oh my God, I wish they hadn't told me that, because now I'm always going to feel cursed. And I was like,
oh, dude. Oh my God. Yeah. She looks at my hand and tells me I have 2 lifelines and that, like my life is going to, I basically am living 2 different lives. And dude, I do feel like that. I do feel like I'm 2 different people sometimes. Like, and that maybe I kind of dance between 2 different planes of existence. Now, these things, when you say them out loud, sound like they're a crazy person, right? But like inside, sometimes I wonder, like, God, what if that lady was right? Yeah, dude, now I wish I never went to her. She told me I was going to have a hard life. And she was like sad. It wasn't like people go in there to hear good news.
Right.
Right? Like people fucking come that. Oh my God, dude. I don't know if that was in New Orleans though, Lars.
Maybe I made that up. Maybe I thought so.
No, because I've gone twice in New Orleans, but I feel like that one might have even been in like California.
Okay.
But yes, she told me I was going to have a hard life. And then she told me I have 2 lifelines. And she points to these 2. Everybody's hands has 2 fucking lines. But that mine, they divide at one point, right? And I'm looking at my hand right now, like, I don't even know which fucking hand it was. Or there's millions of lines on my hand. I don't know which one but she said there's going to be like a great decision for you. And it's going to be either one, though. It's going to be a hard life. And she wasn't like happy telling me this. And it's like, I don't know, man. Okay, logical me. It's like, did I come in with like a cheeky attitude and she's smart enough to know, like, I bet he'll never forget this. Oh, fuck this asshole. Is that? But then what if she was just like delivering the real news and it happened to not be happy news? And then a lot of times I do think about like, I feel fairly certain that I've landed on, the right plane of existence and like that, my life 15 years ago does feel like a different person, and not just the drugs, not just that stuff. Like, I'm a really kind person. Like, I'm like a thoughtful man. I like to do nice things for people. And I got to be honest, like, I'm not sure that existed in me. I don't know, 20 years ago. I think my wife would say, yeah, it's called growing up, dummy, which is pretty funny because that could just be it. Like, you grow up and, you change. But like, God, I think about decisions that I made or like hurtful things that I've done in the past. And it's like, it feels so foreign to me. And I always have this dumb story where it means it's so like benign. But one day I was doing the dishes and I was like, just thinking about why I was doing the dishes. And it was so Tammy could have a clean house to come home to. And I was just thinking about how outside of the me that I always knew that was. Something as simple as doing the dishes. Nowadays, I mean, I take great pride in like having dinner on the table and the house all clean for Tammy. And I'm not making the case like, oh, what a great guy I am. But the good things about me, and I'm kind and I'm a soft guy. I'm a thoughtful, I think of other people's feelings. I only say that because I'm not sure that I did before. And I do feel like a different person, man. I feel like a different guy.
So maybe that's the 2 lives. The 2 lives.
Yeah, I do. I think about that fortune teller with the 2 lives. And I probably followed up that story with this story. In high school, my girlfriend got her fortune told by a fellow high school student, mind you, who tells her right in front of me, oh, your boyfriend doesn't deserve you. And that she broke up with me over that. Over a girl in high school who said she was a fortune teller. It broke my heart. I dated this girl for like 5 years. She broke up with me and referenced that as like one of the reasons. Like, what the fuck, you crazy motherfucker? We, of course, got back together. We dated for years. I thought I was going to marry that girl, as everyone does in high school. But, yeah, I've got a long history with the fortune tellers, Lars. It's so funny. I kind of want to go back and start doing it again. But like my father dating one, I feel like every time I'm around my dad, and I love Mary. Her name's Marion. She was like one of my mom's best friends. So it's a bit strange, but I just want my father to be happy. I think he found and she found some comfort in, dealing with my mom, with each other. And that's fine with me. It's just a little strange. It's a little strange to say my dad's girlfriend because it's just weird. But, every time I'm around my dad, I feel like I get my fortune told a little bit. And, she even told me, Coheed was doing this cruise. It was a big like step for this band. Like, we didn't know if anybody would come, and it ended up being the fastest sellout that the company's ever had, which, I only bring that up because Coheed's not flipping Aerosmith or Green Day. It's like, we're not that big of a band. So we were terrified to do this thing. Mind you, this is the same company that does Kiss's cruise, John Mayer, Paramore. The list is endless. They do like all these enormous cruises. So here we are, scared that nobody's going to buy it, and the thing sells out in a day and a half. And like people from the company write, well, I guess that went pretty good. That was our fastest sellout to date. We've never sold out a cruise faster. And we're like, oh my God. And we're just like, we're going to make this the most amazing experience for fans, all this stuff, And then it gets postponed, right? Corona hits. It's like, oh my God, cruise ships. Our cruise is even going to be a thing. It gets pushed back. And Marion, my dad's girlfriend, we're at dinner here. She tells me, she goes, oh, well, I knew it wasn't going to happen. And I was like, what? She goes, oh, yeah, well, here, the thing is, when the stars are aligned like this, and this is Mercury's in retrograde here. So I actually told your father it wasn't going to happen, which is true. She did. She told my dad when he told her the date, she goes, oh, honey, I'm sorry. That's not going to happen. Now, I said, well, nice to let me know, motherfucker. Jesus Christ. So she goes, I'm being silly about it. I'm like, geez, you could have told me. And I told her, I said, she goes, well, maybe have me have the cruise, or I say, hey, Marion, we'll have you take a look at the dates for the postponement, make sure that we're good with the stars. Clearly kidding. And before she leaves, she goes, so have the cruise company give me a call and I'll take a look. Like, she's dead serious. And I'm like, oh man, I'm not sure that's going to fly, but, yeah, it's kind of funny now, all this fortune teller stuff. And like, I'm around a psychic all the time. Mind you, she is a professional psychic. This is how she's made a living her whole life. And she's an awesome lady. I don't want it to come off like I'm disparaging her. She's amazing. And I love Marion deeply. And she's an awesome, awesome person. And probably in touch with some things that like might be foreign to us. I believe that's true. But the cruise thing is kind of a funny story. Although she called it, man, she said it's not going to happen. And then it didn't, which is kind of mind blowing.
From back when I was just a young kid, I remember digging a piece of metal out from underneath my skin. I remember fiddling, flipping it over, the fear in my mother's eyes when I showed her. I remember waking up, not able to move. I know that this had happened to my mother too. She told me just to pray to Jesus. Don't talk about it, let it alone, just leave it. See, she knew that nobody believed it. Still recall headaches and my nose bleeding. And the logic defied all reason. I need to know the truth and what lies beneath it. Was there a pattern or some kind of sequence? It happened often, but this time went on more frequent. If there was answers, I would actively seek it. Now sweep it under the rug like our little secret. There was no fire in the sky, just a paralyzed, wide-eyed child. We were confused and we lived in fear, cause in the mid-80s something visited Belvedere. There was no fire in the sky, just a paralyzed, wide-eyed child. We were confused and we lived in fear, cause in the mid-80s something visited Belvedere. I remember whispers, I remember cold on my back, an incision and insert. I remember being conscious, stuck to my bed, both terrified and astonished. I remember praying that this was a dream, close my eyes and just try to go to sleep. I remember adrenaline, my heart was beating out of my chest, but I couldn't move anything. It was all so real, but surreal, like watching it all unfold on an old reel-to-reel. Like it was a memory, like somehow I was watching it happen to another me. Like time was manipulated, like the future and the past were both syncopated. Like a ripple in the timeline would find its future self, and when it did, it was reciprocated. There was no fire in the sky, just a paralyzed, wide-eyed child. We were confused and we lived in fear, cause in the mid-80s something visited Belvedere. There was no fire in the sky, just a paralyzed, wide-eyed child. We were confused and we lived in fear, cause in the mid-80s something visited Belvedere. I remember no air, I could feel hands on me coming from nowhere. I remember shadows, blackness, a different kind of dark, the movement of my mattress. I remember shaking, two eyes looked on, both so vacant. A metallic taste, and by now it's safe to assume I'm crazy, cause they didn't take me. Maybe they're watching, cataloging my every move. Maybe they're not, maybe they're watching you. You wouldn't understand unless you lived it. Honestly, I look forward to the next visit. There was no fire in the sky, just a paralyzed, wide-eyed child. We were confused and we lived in fear, cause in the mid-80s something visited Belvedere. There was no fire in the sky, just a paralyzed, wide-eyed child. We were confused and we lived in fear, cause in the mid-80s something visited Belvedere.
Light Juliet, a fantastic song by my man Weerd Science. I hope you're all doing okay. We got a new Hatchet Chat dropping this week. We got a lot of exciting things dropping this week. A new comic every Tuesday. Check the social media. Josh, thanks for your wonderful interview. I hope y'all are doing well, and I'll see you next week with part 3 with Weerd Science. Holler!